Because some roads you shouldn't go down. Because maps used to say there'd be dragons here. Now they don't. But that don't mean the dragons aren't there.
Alright, welcome back to Honored Madman for a special Metal Gear Solid Edition video. So Metal Gear Solid PeaceWalker is a bit like the awkward middle child of the Metal Gear Solid series as a whole. It's not the middle release and it's not really the middle chronologically either, but it is sort of the in-between of the old Metal Gear Solid 1 through 4 style, you know, the campiness and whatnot, and the new, more serious style of Metal Gear Solid: The Phantom Pain and its prequel Ground Zeroes. Not to mention it was developed for the PSP, so it had limited capabilities in terms of mission design and the overall size of the game itself, so it's got a bit of a tarnished reputation, at least in comparison to most of the mainline Metal Gear Solid games. And again, that comes down to several possible reasons. Some people just didn't like the mission structure. Each map is basically broken up into several little segments, and well, let's just say that some of them are a lot smaller and more underwhelming than others. And the same sort of goes for every overall mission. It's sort of broken up into several sub-missions that you have to go through. And I get it, who really wants to deal with that many loading screens? But like I said, not all the maps are bad. They're just sort of nothing compared to what we've seen before. Especially when you compare it to, for example, the opening of Metal Gear Solid 4. It also had the bad luck to essentially be the follow-up to Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, a perfect game, probably my favorite of the series, while also being the next subsequent release following the controversial Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, an underrated game in my opinion, although one that somewhat divided the fanbase. And PeaceWalker, the game itself, effectively functioned as a prequel to what would follow it, The Phantom Pain and Ground Zeroes. This, in my opinion, retroactively worked in PeaceWalker's favor, mainly due to how the massive tonal shift and the much darker atmosphere in The Phantom Pain compares to the much more positive and upbeat themed PeaceWalker. Just for an example, in The Phantom Pain, when the gang rescues a group of child soldiers, a long moral dilemma follows. Conflicts between the leads occur on how to deal with the kids as they struggle to adapt to a quote-unquote normal life while living on a mercenary base surrounded by the tools of warfare. Now compare that to PeaceWalker, where early on Snake meets a child soldier, and instead of helping the kid get out of this lifestyle, he instead indoctrinates them and recruits him to be his monster-hunting sidekick. More on that in just a second. Overall, the biggest problem with PeaceWalker itself is its bosses. Most of them are pretty uninspired, tanks, choppers, etc. And on top of that, they were intended to be fought as co-op battles, so they tend to have egregiously bloated health bars. Still doable, just very, very repetitive. Now, the same goes for the quote-unquote bosses that we're going to talk about today, but at least they're unique and a lot more fun. Now, sorry for that long preamble, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the video proper. As the title probably suggests, we're going to be talking crossovers. So when it comes to Metal Gear Solid, if there's one thing it's known for, it's crossovers and references to other game series. Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of the Liberty had a Tony Hawk Pro Skater minigame, and Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater had an ape escape sequence. Now, I can't remember off the top of my head if Guns of the Patriots had any because it's been so long since I've actually been able to finish that game, but you get my drift. Some other games have even referenced Metal Gear Solid, like Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, which has an early section that's essentially sneaking into a heavily guarded fortress without your weapons, so you have to use like these barrels instead of boxes as cover to bypass all the guards, and if you get caught, they toss you in a cell that you will then have to break out of and then sneak through the rest of the section again, bypassing all the guards until you get your sword back and attempt to free your sister. One of the most iconic parts in the game, in my opinion. I know some people don't like it, but it's always been one of my favorites. But today we're going to be talking about a lesser known, well, maybe it's not lesser known, maybe that's the bad terminology for it. A lesser talked about crossover that Metal Gear Solid had, where the great big boss went up against some literal dragons from Monster Hunter. I am of course talking about the hunting missions in Metal Gear Solid PeaceWalker. Some of, in my opinion, the hardest side missions in this game. These levels pit Big Boss against three different types of Monster Hunter enemies that are all flanked by all these little raptor things that I imagine are also from the Monster Hunter series. Now, I'm not that familiar with the Monster Hunter games, but I've watched my girlfriend play them enough times to recognize some of these little raptors and some of the bigger monsters. Now, 2 of them are from Monster Hunter. The final one is like a mashup. It's like a cyborg version of a Monster Hunter monster. It's the Metal Gear version, if you will. Now, if you played PeaceWalker and never encountered these missions, you'd be forgiven for missing them because you kind of have to go out of your way to unlock them. As PeaceWalker is basically the predecessor to Metal Gear Solid Ground Zeroes and Phantom Pain, Kojima had already begun to toy with the idea of making a lot of the codec calls into optional tapes to listen to. And in this case in the game, there are several optional tapes you can listen to from the child soldier known as Chico. Obviously, you need to have already met him and recruited him into your merry band of misfits in order for the tapes to pop up, but what I would recommend is to just make sure you listen to all of Chico's tapes as they come in. You know, for every mission or side op, just check and see if Chico has any new lore or information he can give you, and then just listen to it. And occasionally from time to time he'll bring up a seemingly fictional monster. Those tapes, to be specific, are the ones you need to listen to. Now, after you've listened to the appropriate briefing files and Chico tapes, head on over to Extra Ops Mission 29, which I believe is just a simple item retrieval mission. Now, after you break the crate and secure the loot, don't head over to the extraction point just yet. Instead, head on over to the dock. You'll know you're heading the right way once you hear Miller mention a weird-looking animal. And the creature in question turns out to be one of the Trenya, a cat person from the Monster Hunter series. Now, this one in particular is just posted up on a boat, and they exchange a few cat-related jokes with Snake, after which point the mission should end, and then after you get back to the mother base screen, you'll have a new side op unlocked. Specifically a hunting mission with the target being a monster known as a Rathalos, which if you've played the Monster Hunter games you should recognize as a staple of the series. It's essentially a dragon, or I guess more like a wyvern or a forktail, you know, from like The Witcher, which Monster Hunter also has a crossover with, random reference there. But yeah, the Rathalos is essentially a dragon light. Now, depending on where you're at in the game and how upgraded your arsenal is, these fights can take quite a long time to finish. But that goes for just about every boss fight in this game, doesn't it? And as you can probably guess, fighting one of these things isn't exactly easy, but there is a sort of loop you can get into with fighting one. It's also advisable to try and aim for specific appendages of the monsters. For example, on the Rathalos, aim at the wings. Breaking off pieces of the monster tends to increase your chances at getting the coveted drops that they have. And honestly, there's nothing more satisfying in this game than shooting that sumbitch out of the air. The Tigrex, though, on the other hand, is a bit trickier. It's basically a fight with an extremely powerful and agile dinosaur. I mean, this motherfucker jumps and lunges at you, and with the exception of the flying, it's far more mobile than the Rathalos, and way harder to dodge. Which, going off of some threads I've read, is exactly how the Tigrex behaves in the Monster Hunter games. So, you know, kudos to the developers for implementing those mechanics the right way, I guess. Personally, I had a way harder time with the Tigrex than I did with Rathalos, which I guess is supposed to be the intention since you have to beat the Rathalos to unlock the Tigrex fight, but still in my opinion there's quite the gap in power between the two. Now, there's a number of tricks you can do to make these fights just a tad bit easier. I mean, the little raptors can be distracted by the magazines. You can use your stun rod to zap the raptors as they come at you, although it's probably best you only attempt that one if you have the upgraded stun rod. And most importantly, the big monsters all appear to have weak points. Like, for example, the Rathalos has a weak point on his neck and his belly. There's basically a lot of tricks you can try out to possibly make the fights easier, or at the very least, a little more fun. And by default, a little less repetitive. Because I do believe that's their one fault, is just how repetitive these boss fights can get. And it's worth noting that the Rathalos, the Tigrex, and the as of yet unnamed third Monster Hunter enemy are all accompanied by these little blue raptor type guys. So it's good to bring a shotgun alongside your preferred rocket launcher to help you deal with the little guys. Any shotgun will do. I mean, I made do with the double barrel and had no problems. Basically anything that one-shots the lizards when they come running at you. But yeah, the Rathalos, and I'm just going to lump the Tigrex in too because, well, it applies to it just as much as the Rathalos, but they have these ridiculously huge health bars. And every fight takes place at the designated monster arena, Isle del Monstruo, which again is only accessible after you've met the Trenya in Extra Ops 29. I like to think of it as a big boss investigating the mysterious disappearances that happen in the Pacific. Bermuda Triangle type shit, but instead of finding Notorious Chase from JoJo's, they instead find the monsters from the Monster Hunter universe. And as we know, this isn't Big Boss's first encounter with a UMA. He famously found and possibly ate the Tsuchinoko when he was on Operation Snake Eater back in the 60s. But anyways, though, one of the coolest parts of this game is your first trip to the Ile de Monstruo. And I gotta say, I think it's helped by how great these cutscenes are. Goddamn, those Yoji Shinkawa cutscenes are just too good, aren't they? I mean, I know some people might not have liked the switch to the comic book style, but I know I did. Who'd have thought, though, that we'd get to see Big Boss interacting with these talking cats from the Monster Hunter franchise? And again, I know there's been plenty of Metal Gear Solid crossovers in the past. Obviously, like those, this one is rendered non-canon. But honestly, who really cares about what canon is outside of, people who are writing wikis? Especially when it takes place in a universe as unhinged as this. It doesn't really alter the story at all to believe that Big Boss, while he was out in Costa Rica, he happened to hunt some dragons and some monstrous beasts from another franchise. And it's even sort of implied that stuff like the Rathalos had been attacking ships off the coast. Not in so many words, but it was directly implied. Chico mentioned seeing it in an old lore book. I mean, it's already sort of worked into the world. It's not like it doesn't fit in line with the tone of the franchise. Look how magnificently over the top all of the bosses are in Metal Gear Solid 1. You've got psychics, cyborgs, Russian guys who like to cosplay as cowboys. As far as I'm concerned, a talking cat and some dragon-like reptilian monsters, who's to say they don't fit into this world? And now I think it's time to talk about the mysterious third monster hunt that is only unlocked after the Tigrex is defeated. Now, this unholy abomination appears to be a fusion of a Monster Hunter-style dinosaur and Metal Gear technology. And as such, its powers are devastating. It's got a goddamn laser beam. It's effectively the Dark Eater Midir of the Metal Gear Solid universe. Now, yeah, if you thought the other bosses were a pain in the ass, this one sort of takes the cake. And honestly, as these are all optional, they don't really, you don't need to take them on, but they are fun. Well, if you can get into a fun loop at least. And maybe fun's the wrong word with how repetitive they can get, but they definitely feel like an accomplishment once you've completed them. And there's like a certain kind of novelty to them. There's something new in the Metal Gear universe. It's fun. I think I will stick with that word, I guess. And just to be clear, there aren't just 3 Monster Hunter extra ops. Each one of these guys has its own stock monster boss fight, and then after you beat that one, you unlock the next step up the ladder, and also a Twilight version of the same boss fight. Now, what does the Twilight version mean, you ask? Well, it's quite simple, actually. It just takes place at sunset. Now, for a while, I thought that these fights were a little bit harder, or that the bosses had more health, but I actually had an easier time fighting the Twilight Rathalos than I did with the original, although I can't say the same for the Tigrex. Now, I believe I read somewhere that the Twilight versions do have an increased drop rate, but again, I believe a lot of that is dependent on which of the limbs are damaged, if you damage the wings, or if you were just damaging the head, how you fought the boss. Which reminds me, fighting these monsters isn't the only thing you can do on the Ile de Monstruo. You can also roast your rations on a spit with the cat people. They even have a few different outcomes based on how long you leave them on the roaster. Rare, well done, and of course, burnt. Which I think is a really cool little feature, honestly. There's something about just pulling up on one of them beach chairs and literally roasting a piece of ration while it's still in its container that just screams Hideo Kojima.
Did you like it?
You're goddamn right I did. Also, I probably should mention that the rare option and the burnt option actually makes the rations worse. The only one you should be going for is well done, which is, to me, insane. But we are talking military grade rations here, so maybe it makes sense. So the Tigrex and the Rathalos both have 2 boss fights each. But Metal Gear Rex, I believe, has 3 or 4 different encounters. There's at one point it shows up at Mother Base and you have to fight it there. It also has, its standard version, its Twilight version, and I believe one other encounter where it shows up at a crater at one of the maps from the main story. Either way, Gear Rex has probably got the coolest design out of them all. I'm not saying Rathalos and Tigrex, anything wrong with them, but Metal Gear Rex is like a Godzilla-style dragon monster cyborg thing. The perfect combination of the 2 franchises. So you already know it has this over-the-top design, but I think it really, really does fit into the world of Metal Gear Solid. It's like the MGS universe's Godzilla. And the main incentive one would have for hunting these beasts outside of, a grand spectacle would be their drops. I mean, I believe you get a camo for each of the monsters you take out, and there's a chance they drop their trophy, which, in turn unlocks something to be developed in the R&D section of Mother Base. For example, the Rathalos, if you happen to be lucky enough to get its wing as a drop, then you are now able to develop the Tangashima musket. So basically the answer is a souvenir, a codec entry, and some specialty/novelty gear. But again, the whole point isn't to just do it for the rewards. They're sort of like a bonus. The real reason to do it is for the grandness of it all, fighting a wyvern with a rocket launcher, defending Mother Base against Metal Gear Solid's version of Godzilla. It's really quite something, and it does wonders for the lore about the legends of Big Boss, especially with the way they talk about him in the very next game in the chapter, Metal Gear Solid 5. You would think that the guy was literally hunting dragons and various eldritch creatures based on how they speak of him as almost this godlike figure. And I know I probably said it way too many times, but it's super fitting. It just works. It's not really all that surprising that the most underrated Metal Gear Solid game has the most underrated and least known about crossover. I mean, the whole reason I decided to make this video is because I never really hear people talk about this one. And while I do appreciate all of the other various crossovers Metal Gear Solid has had, I would go so far as to say that this one is one of the better crossovers in general for all of gaming. It's simple, it's easy to do, it's fun, there's spectacle. The only downside is the absolutely insane health bars and the sometimes repetitive nature of the fights, but hands down, solid crossover. And so far, it's one of the only ones to not be deleted from subsequent releases of the game, or well, yet at least. Because as we know, it's not like you can access the Ape Escape minigame, or the Guy Savage Dream, or even the Tony Hawk minigame in Metal Gear Solid 2. You can't do none of that in the HD re-releases of Metal Gear Solid 2 and 3 that came shipped with PeaceWalker, but well, only on the PS3. If you happened to buy the collection on Xbox 360 back in the day, though, you only got 2 and 3. You had to buy the Xbox version of PeaceWalker separate. Gotta love Konami, right? Although with how Sega's doing that new Yakuza, they seem to be attempting to take a shot at the champ. And I know I mentioned it before, and I should probably save it for the PeaceWalker overall video, but one thing I really liked about it is how it just overall compares to Metal Gear Solid 5. It's like Kojima did a revisionist Western version of Metal Gear Solid. He exchanged all the fun, campiness, or well, not all of it, most of it, for this atmosphere of introspective gloom and hopelessness that sort of permeates Metal Gear Solid 5. I'll probably try to find a way to word it better for the other video, but it's something that enhances both games when you compare just their overall tones and what happens in them and their stories, even though Metal Gear Solid 5 is basically a parentheses unfinished Metal Gear Solid game. Anyway, though, I'm already getting off topic, but this video was supposed to be a little bit of one of the shorter ones. I have a bigger video for PeaceWalker scheduled. I just have to get through these half-finished projects I have before I decide to start a new one. But as always, I hope you guys found this video to be at least somewhat informative and entertaining. And if you liked it, please like it. If you disliked it, please dislike it. And if you like hearing me ramble on about the various video game franchises that I find intriguing and the occasional TV show, then please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel out. But enough of that let's get to our outro and the old alchemy lab, shall we? That new Death Stranding trailer was fucking nuts, though. I almost want to do a video about that. I mean, the thing was 10 minutes long and there's a lot to unpack there, but I hadn't really done any Death Stranding videos in the past, so it might be kind of jarring for the channel, but it's a game I really like, and I think that this second one looks like a huge step up in the same way that, in my opinion, Tears of the Kingdom was a huge step up from the already great Breath of the Wild. But that is, of course, a story for another day. Now, I wanted to have the Aldia video out today, and it'll be coming real soon. I just have to finish a couple last-minute edits on it, and he's a character I really like, and it's a video that I really want to make sure I get right. But yeah, sorry for the long delays. I'm going to try and get back to our regularly scheduled broadcasting as soon as I can. But as always, I hope everyone is doing well. I will be seeing you next time. I have a lot of interesting videos that are almost done, and I finally have the time to work on them. So should be seeing you guys again real soon.